President Trump declaring states of emergencies in Florida, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, as Americans are bracing for Hurricane Irma. But funding for this relief effort now reportedly running low. The Federal Emergency Management Agency's Disaster Relief Fund is down to its last $1 billion, according to Bloomberg. This story this morning says that more than half of that is immediately available for Harvey response and recovery efforts. Joining me right now is the Illinois Congressman and House Chairman of the Ways and Means Tax Policy Committee, a subcommittee, Peter Roskam. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thanks very much for joining me this morning.
Thanks, Maria. Great to be with you.
First, let's talk about FEMA. What does this mean with Hurricane Irma on the way? Is FEMA running out of money this week?
Well, I think it's incredibly significant, which is why the majority leader announced that there's going to be a vote this morning or action today in the House of Representatives as it relates to this. Look, our country is a country that comes together in times like this. There's no question in my mind that the resources will be there. It's a matter of timing and working these things out. And I think most people, particularly members of Congress, recognize the urgency of this. Not only what's happening in Texas, but what you've been reporting and we see is coming upon Florida any day now.
Yeah, we had Kevin McCarthy on yesterday, the majority leader, and the House is expected to vote on that Hurricane Harvey relief funding. But the possibility of adding a suspension of the federal debt limit to the measure is also out there. Not all lawmakers are on board. How do you see it? Do you think this should be tied to the debt ceiling increase?
Well, previously, the Trump administration, Secretary Mnuchin in particular, had said, listen, give me a clean debt ceiling. That was testimony before the Ways and Means Committee a couple of months ago. Now, that may have shifted. My instinct is this, that these are two terribly important things. Whether they're joined or not is an interesting sort of legislative parlor game. But when it all comes down to it, they both have to be dealt with. So that's really a tactical question that I'll defer to the leadership on. But when it comes down to it, you got to deal with the debt ceiling and you've got to deal with making sure that these relief efforts are well resourced. Yeah.
Meanwhile, the president is headed to North Dakota today to push a tax overhaul after he met with the so-called Big Six at the White House yesterday to talk about tax reform. Here's what was said. Listen to this, sir.
This is more than just tax reform. This is tax cutting, to put it in a very simple term. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to reduce taxes for people, for individuals, for middle-income families. We're going to reduce taxes for companies, and those companies are going to produce jobs.
So what can you tell us, Congressman? Where is the tax bill?
Look, there's nobody that's defending the status quo, which is interesting. Nobody likes the Internal Revenue Code. Some people like parts of it, but nobody likes the whole thing. And there's now, we're waiting for an agreement from the Big Six, the folks that have been meeting over these past couple of months to lay out some parameters so that we can move forward. Here's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid a House version of tax reform, a Senate version of tax reform, White House language on tax reform. Instead, since you've got one party in majorities in the House and in the White House and in the Senate, let's move forward on one plan. But there's got to be some parameters, and that's really what we're waiting for. Once we get those agreed upon parameters that the Senate leadership and House leadership and the White House sign off on, then you can go to the tax writers and say, all right, fill this in and then create this. But there's a sense of urgency now, and the urgency is we've got this collapsing window of time. This has to happen, in my opinion, in 2017. If it doesn't happen in 2017, this will be the big fish that got away. So let's not let it get away, and let's get about this business right now.
Yeah.
But there's got to be an agreement on these parameters.
But what are the parameters, though, Congressman? I mean, you can understand the frustration, right? We've been talking about tax reform since the president was elected, and here we are with 11 days left for actually any legislation to get done. I mean, we know the parameters already, Congressman? We had a white paper that the White House released in April. Simplify the code, go from 7 to 3 brackets, cut corporate taxes. President wants 15%. The House wants 22%. I mean, what are the parameters are you looking for?
So here's some of the parameters you got to deal with. What are the rates that we want to actually get to? What are the so-called pay-fors that we're going to put on the table? Are we going to put pay-fors on the table? Is this something that we're just going to increase the debt and deficit on? I think that's a bad idea, but there are some voices out there that say, hey, just cut the taxes and don't worry about it. Those are fundamental questions. Those are parameters. Those are marcation lines that have to be dealt with. You can't get into this process 6, 8, 12 weeks into it and say, well, you know what, we're not going to pay for this anyways, so who cares? You got to lay those things out clearly up front, and they've got to be solid. Then you can negotiate. And then once you do that, then leave it to the Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, and ultimately both the House and the Senate to get this thing up, out, and on the president's desk by the end of the year.
Why should anybody believe that the Senate and the House are going to agree on anything when you guys couldn't do it for health care?
Look, I take your point, but there's no percentage in being cynical. Okay, we can marinate in cynicism, and that's kind of charming and sort of interesting,
I haven't been
but it doesn't.
cynical, by the way. I've been optimistic all year,
Well,
but now
God
we're down
bless
to
you.
11 days.
Yeah, but so it's not going to happen in 11 days. So I said by 2017. So we've got this fall to get this done. And there's an urgency to this. And look, our country has gone through incredible things in the past, and we've taken on incredible challenges in the past. And the question is, are we going to treat the tax code as if it's a natural disaster, like we can't do anything about it? And the answer is, of course not.
Right.
Let's do something about it.
So you think
and
you'll
let's
get it
move
done
with
this
urgency.
year? You think you'll get it done this year?
This year, 2017 is the year. I sure do.
Congressman, we'll be watching. Good to have you on the
Thanks.
program, as always. Thank you, sir. Peter Roskam there. We'll be right back.